All right, everyone. Hello. Happy. Is it Thursday? I don't even know what day it is anymore. I think it's Thursday. Welcome to the stream. I'm very excited for our stream today, folks, because we have a real live progressive voter and political psychologist that has come to have a rational conversation with us. Can you imagine that? So, Karen Tamarius is the founder of Smart Politics, a former psychiatrist and an expert in political psychology who specializes in teaching progressives how to communicate more productively and persuasively with people across the political spectrum. She earned her BA in political science from UC Berkeley and her MD from UC San Francisco, which is a great school. I'm actually a big fan of that school. She is best known for her work on The Angry Uncle Bot in the New York Times and is currently co-authoring a book with Dr. David Camp on how conversations with friends and family can elect Joe Biden. Karen, welcome to the live stream. Do you mind if I call you Karen? You're Dr. Karen technically, but we like to keep it informal here. Well, you first came on my radar when you wrote this article on Medium, "Dear Democrats, beware dragon voters." And I have to say, I was a little skeptical of this article. I can sometimes be a little bit snarky about things, and I kind of was looking at it in the morning while I was laying in bed, not really reading it closely, and I tweeted it out, making a little fun of it. But then I sat down to read it, and I thought it was actually a really good article. So can you tell us a little bit about this piece and what message you were trying to convey with it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for reading it and for sharing it with your viewers and listeners. Really, what I was trying to do with this piece was to send a wake-up call to my fellow progressives, my fellow Democrats, who are using campaign techniques and campaign strategies that I think are really counterproductive. If you talk with people on the left about how they think they're going to win in 2020, a lot of the focus is on mobilizing voters on the left and getting them riled up to turn out to the polls and angry, and they think if we get voters angry enough, then they'll turn out and vote. And one of the points that I really want to get across to progressives is that a lot of what we do to rile up our base, to get people out to the polls, actually makes voters on the right really angry too. And that the way we treat people on the right is one of the factors that's really driving the Trump phenomenon. And so if we want to broaden our appeal, get people not to hate us so much, even if they don't agree with us, then we're going to have to start treating people better.
Mm-hmm. And I actually really appreciate that perspective, because part of my journey to, I won't say I'm on the right, but my journey away from the Democratic Party, it really started when I was very much vote blue no matter who. I don't care who it is. I'm voting for the Democrat that gets the nomination. And I started kind of this journey of listening to voices that I thought I would disagree with, precisely because I was like, guys, if we're going to beat Donald Trump, then we need to understand why people are voting for him. Mm-hmm. And that was the impetus for me starting this whole thing, was just to really understand it and come at it from not a place of anger or hate, but just to really understand the rationale behind why people are voting for him. And I actually got a lot of pushback from my friends who are on the left saying, Carlin, why are you even bothering to do this? We all know why they're voting for him. They're racist and Nazis, and that's all we need to know.
Right.
Have you had that?
Absolutely. When I started my political work again after taking a long hiatus, it was after the 2016 election, and my response to Trump winning the presidency was basically to say, I disagree with this, and I need to know why it happened, because if I'm going to respond effectively, I need to understand what's driving voters, and that impetus has not always been met, positively by my friends and peers on the left who really have sometimes very simplistic views of why the Trump phenomenon is happening, why people are drawn to Trump as a candidate, what causes someone to decide to vote Republican rather than to vote Democratic. And it doesn't.
Apparently my photo does not want us to have this either. Okay, we'll deal with that later.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I did not expect my picture to fall off the wall.
Essentially, does. No.
And so, why do you think that people are voting for Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, there are lots of reasons, but if I had to pick the number one reason, as a political scientist, most people who vote for Donald Trump do it because he's a Republican and they're Republicans, like straight up. That the single best predictor of who votes for Donald Trump is partisan identity. The second biggest predictor of who votes for Donald Trump is probably going to be a factor like race. Another predictor is going to be sex. There are lots of things that drive people to make that choice. Does it mean that every Republican votes for Trump? No. Does it mean that every Democrat votes against Trump? No. But from a statistical perspective, that's what's driving it.
Well, I mean, and I think certainly we can agree on that people who are Republican are definitely going to be more inclined to vote for the Republican. But how do you account for people like me who I was a very committed Democrat up until about 6 months ago, and now I'm 100% on the Trump train? What's driving people like me?
Well, so I hesitate to tell your story because I do believe that every person has their own path to making a choice about who to vote for. But I definitely think there are people who, these are the people I write about in this article, who feel alienated and demonized by the left, by the Democratic Party. And when you feel attacked, when you feel isolated, when you feel demonized, you are going to find alternatives. And right now, Trump is the best alternative to the Democratic Party.
Well, certainly that's true. I mean, really, he's the only viable alternative that we have. But I wouldn't say that I even felt alienated. And granted, like I'm one person, but I've interacted with enough of the walkaway folks now that I feel like I can speak for some of them on some level, since, not everyone can be here today, unfortunately. And I think that there's also been the thing that really got my attention was the identity politics and how the left seems to be more interested in driving wedges between people than they are in bringing people together. What role do you, well, I guess I'm going to back up. How do you perceive identity politics?
I think I have a slightly different take on this than a lot of people, because I think politics has always been identity politics. Who you are has always drives how you vote, who you associate with, who you define as your people. And so I think what has really shifted recently is just which people, which groups are have moved into the forefront as being defining traits, rather than saying that identity matters now when it didn't before. And so people are a little more explicit and embrace identity now more openly than they used to, but it's not necessarily something new. And I think most political scientists would agree with that analysis.
Well, I think, let me get a little bit more specific with what I'm talking about. Every single thing is racist. Every single thing is white supremacist.
Mm-hmm.
Every single thing is misogynist. Misogyny is the reason that Hillary Clinton lost. It has to be misogyny. Mm-hmm. It's only misogyny. And, I just did a whole video yesterday about responding to this idea that organizations are filled with white supremacists and are built on a white supremacist hierarchy that was completely wrong. Like the whole philosophy behind it was wrong. It has more to do with people's work style and the psychology of it than it does have to have anything to do with race. But everything from the Democratic Party now is racist. And that to me is a big problem. And, I think that even looking what's going on in the world right now, when I see something like the tragedy of George Floyd's death, which is a tragedy, which I do believe was at least partially caused by race. I do not believe he'd be dead right now if he was a white woman. I don't believe he'd be dead right now if he was a white man in exactly the same size. I believe that race played a factor in that. But we can't even have a conversation about that because from the left, everything is racist. Coronavirus is racist. Mask is racist. Quarantine is racist. I was called a white supremacist the other day by someone on a coaching call because I suggested that people might want to go back to work. And so when all of a sudden everything is racist, we can't actually have a conversation about things that might legitimately relate to race. And that, I think, is one of the things that, for me, has gotten very extreme in the last several years.
Mm-hmm. I think that the topic of race my computer's trying to shut down. Hold on.
Oh, no.
Okay. Hopefully, if I disappear suddenly, it's because my computer is misobeying, or disobeying. So I think you're picking up on a real phenomenon there. And it's a phenomenon I talk about a lot that I do consider problematic. And what I think about when I think about the conversation around race and politics in this country right now is that it's become very all or nothing. That it's, for lack of a better term, it's become all black and white. People aren't seeing shades of gray. They aren't seeing nuance. They aren't seeing the fact that there are gradations of racism, that there is mild implicit racism that people aren't even consciously aware of. And then there's white supremacy on the other end, and all kinds of variations in between. The problem in our discourse is that we approach it in a binary. So we want to talk about it either as, yes, it's racist, or no, it's not racist. And whichever side it falls on in that line, the consequences are exactly the same. And so I too have been called a white supremacist. I went to a workshop on helping white women confront internalized racism and unconscious racial bias. And within the first 5 minutes of me being in the workshop, I was called a white supremacist because I ran an organization that was 80% white. Now, do I think that is true in any way of who I am or the work that I do? Absolutely not. At the same time, I will say that accusation is in no way representative of the progressive movement or the majority of people on the left and what they believe. This was a person who had other motivations, other concerns, and decided to lob that at me because she was upset in the moment. So I think all of this has to be taken in perspective. I can imagine a situation where my response to that could have been, the left is crazy. This woman is just an example of that. They call everything race and everybody a white supremacist. And I could have walked away at that point. My position is, you know what? This person is wrong. And I don't have to accept this characterization of me. And I also don't have to abandon my party because there are people in it who think this way.
Well, but it seems as though a good bit of the party has been taken over with this type of thinking. And I think part of it comes to the fact that we are fundamentally defining racism differently than we did 20 years ago when I became a Democrat, because it used to be about thinking that one race is superior or and acting more overtly. And I can buy into some unconscious racism. As I said, I do believe that I don't think that George Floyd would be dead right now if he was a white man. I just don't. And so I can buy into some of that. But when everything comes back to someone's identity, I'll give you another example. Elizabeth Warren not getting the Democratic nomination. What was the very first thing we heard as the only possible explanation for Elizabeth Warren not being the Democratic nominee? Misogyny. That must be what it is. We're just not ready for a woman nominee, and it has to be misogyny. Well, the fact of the matter is, Elizabeth Warren was a terrible candidate. I saw her like several times in New Hampshire. She was good at first, and then she became bad. Like it got really, really bad at the end. She went. I mean, talking about vetting Department of Education secretaries through teenagers. I mean, trans teenagers, but teenagers nonetheless. Like that's insane. We should not be looking to teenagers for permission to appoint someone to be the Secretary of Education, right? And so, like the answer to that, from my perspective, it has nothing to do with her gender. It has to do with the fact that she became a really bad candidate. But if you're talking to someone, and basically everyone I know that was supporting her said the same thing: misogyny. It's only because she was a woman.
Yeah. This is one of those questions that's actually really amenable to social science research. Like we can figure out pretty easily what role gender bias played in support for Elizabeth Warren and differences. What I've seen in the social science research is that it was there, but was it a defining factor? I don't think so. Based on that, I do think one of the interesting things has been, given that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren were so similar in terms of their candidacies, that suggests that there might have been a role played in by gender in that decision. I think people are always inclined, when something happens that they don't like, to explain it in terms that kind of make the other side look bad, or to make the people who disagreed with them look bad. And so it doesn't surprise me if you're seeing that phenomenon and it is in some ways out of proportion to reality.
Well, I think I have to push back on the idea, though, that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren were so similar in their campaigns. First off, Bernie ran in 2016, and I voted for him, so I'm a big Bernie fan, or I was then. I think he went crazy. But Bernie ran in 2016. Bernie already had a mailing list. He already had an operation set up. He'd already done this before, so he had way more experience than Elizabeth Warren. Also, Bernie did not blatantly lie about Elizabeth Warren. When Elizabeth Warren said that Bernie Sanders said that there was like a woman can't win this election, I'm sorry, that was an outright lie. She set him up for that. That was one of the things that really was the turning point for me with her. I was like, there's no way I can, like, if she's going to lie about something so stupid, she's absolutely going to lie about things that are far more important. So I don't necessarily agree that they were the same candidate.
How do you know it was a lie? Because I was kind of agnostic on all of that, because I never saw any evidence one way or the other.
Because Bernie Sanders, I've come from Vermont. I've known Bernie Sanders literally all my life. There's never been a time when he hasn't been in public life, in my experience. And he has said for years, I mean, decades and decades, that a woman could be elected. So to all of a sudden hear that Bernie Sanders at this stage said a woman can't win, I don't buy it for one red second.
So it's not like you've seen proof. It's more there is proof based on past character.
No, there is absolutely proof. I don't have the video offhand, but there is a video, and I want to say it was like 20 or 30 years old, of Bernie talking about women being elected.
Okay, but not about Elizabeth Warren specifically.
No, but that's not what he said. It was that a woman won't be elected. I don't think it was specific about her.
Okay.
But so I think we definitely have a disagreement there. And I think what I'm hearing in this conversation, it's like, I can see, because you teach people how to try to persuade people like me, and I can see some things, and I'm not saying it's bad, but I can see how you're kind of doing that with you're not telling me no in any way. You're not trying to put up and say, Carlin, you are wrong. You're trying to do like the yes and thing, where you're like, yeah, I can see your point of view, and maybe this is another way we can look at it. And then you're trying to find some way for us to connect and acknowledge that we have some personal experience, or the shared experience, and some areas of agreement. Am I right about what you're doing there?
At this point, I don't do it very consciously, I gotta say. When I first started doing this work and really reaching out to conservatives to have conversations, I kind of naturally fell into my therapeutic stance, because for many years I've been working as a therapist, and as a therapist, you learn to, withhold your own views and encourage people to work through things on their own. And if you do disagree, you don't do it directly. You make suggestions and encourage people to figure it out for themselves, because in a therapeutic relationship, it's not my job to figure out someone's life for them. And I really feel that same way about voting. It's not my job to tell you who to vote for, or to convince you that I'm right. All I can do is like get you to maybe consider my perspective and decide for yourself whether it's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's fair enough. And I actually don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with using psychology to try to convince people to vote a certain way. I mean, as I said from the beginning, that was actually what I was trying to do when I went down on this journey, and it just ended up in a completely different place than I anticipated. And I think that people should make their own decisions at the end of the day about who they want to vote for. So you want to take some questions and maybe try
Absolutely.
let's try to win over some Trump voters, because I know most of these came from Trump voters.
Honestly, I just don't want people to hate me. Like right? I mean, I don't expect Trump voters to like turn on a dime and suddenly decide, I've been wrong all this time. Like, no, really, I'm not the bad guy. And no. I don't think the left more broadly is bad. We all make mistakes.
Some of them are bad. I don't think you're bad, though. I don't think you're bad. I think
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And what I will say too is that we already have messages coming in the chat. We don't hate you. We don't hate you. So people are cool.
All right. Well, I was the first hurdle for the day. Like not being hated. That's always a plus.
No. Look, we've got Vicky here. Vicky says Karen isn't a nut job, but she isn't well informed about politics.
All right.
So you're not a nut job.
But I am.
I think you are too. I think you are. And I'm very glad that no one's called you that type of Karen yet, I have to say as well, because she's not that type of Karen, guys. Okay. And I want to say this too before we get to the questions, is what I found on the right is that as long as you come with an open mind, I cannot tell you how many times people on the right that I disagree with on a lot of issues have said to me, Carlin, you have an open mind, and that's all that matters, and that's all that we really want. So if there are any people on the left or progressives watching this, just talk to people with an open mind and don't call them a racist or a Nazi or any of the other phobes, and you'll be fine. You'll be cool. All right, so I'm going to take, the first set of questions is from my locals community. And guys, by the way, if you want to connect with Dr. Karen, her information is in the description below, and please hit the thumbs up while you're looking at it so we can get some YouTube love. So our first question from locals comes from Ben. And it's a little bit long, so I'm gonna read the whole thing. And he says, it is commonly asserted by those on the left that censorship on social media of people on the right doesn't exist. When I show my friends examples of it in real time, they insist my examples don't count or that the few who do get censored are extremists and therefore don't represent systemic suppression. Is this a view you share? If so, why? If not, how might you recommend I conduct these discussions in the future? A lot there.
There is a lot there. And I have to begin by saying this is not a subject that I am well informed on. I'm not a censorship expert. So I'm just going to put that out there. What I can tell you is in the conversations that I have with people on the right and the left, I hear both sides talking to me about censorship. So I hear people on the right expressing concern about, well, like for example, Carlin, I think yesterday you were talking about a friend who had used a word in a tweet and yeah, okay. Yeah, and somehow got put into Twitter jail or right?
Yep.
And I often hear from people on the left that when they share videos of African Americans being mistreated by the police, that those get taken down, particularly on Facebook. And so they feel like that is a form of censorship that's preventing their political message from getting out. I don't know, like my suspicion is this is happening on both sides. I have no idea whether it's happening to a greater degree on one side than the other. But what I can say is that I think our society has done a really lousy job of coming to terms with social media and the power that it has in our society, and trying to balance basic human freedoms with protecting people from abuse. And we need to confront that and have a better conversation. We need to get government involved. We need to get private industry involved. We should develop some kind of regulatory board to make decisions where all interests and all viewpoints are represented and everyone can come to some kind of agreement about what is reasonable. Right now, that's not happening. It's happening piecemeal, and it doesn't make sense. And it creates, I think, a certain degree of paranoia on all sides, because everyone kind of feels, if you've had some interaction where you feel like your voice has been shuttered, then the obvious, like, you're going to draw the conclusion that people are targeting you unfairly, and that's what we've got to avoid.
Well, I can say from my experience, I've been on social media, and I actually did social media professionally for a long, long time. So I've basically been on this stuff the entire time that social media has been a thing in our experience. I never experienced censorship or anything when I was on the left. The minute that my article went viral, I was shadow banned on Instagram. I got shadow banned repeatedly on Instagram. I mean, over the course of like several weeks, it was all the time. I was constantly shadow banned. I've been shadow banned on Twitter. I get messages all the time from people saying Twitter is unfollowing me from your account. On YouTube, I get messages all the time saying I was subscribed to you and now I'm not subscribed anymore. I can look at my YouTube statistics and know exactly when YouTube is suppressing my content and when they are not. It is very, very obvious. And by the way, guys, subscribe if you haven't already, or if you think you're subscribed, check, because you might not be. And so, I mean, for me, the difference between before my article and after my article, it was very, very stark. I could say whatever I wanted before my article, and I said some horrible things targeted at the right. I absolutely said horrible things that I regret that probably should have been taken down, but that weren't. And so I guess maybe I'm gonna ask a more pointed question and just kind of keeping it high level and talking about like maybe a specific policy. If it could be proven, just like emphatically, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that sites like Twitter were unfairly targeting conservatives, would that be something you would be against?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Agreement.
Like, I think equal representation of viewpoints that is a fundamental tenet of democracy. If we can't say what we believe, what's on our minds openly, democracy is impossible.
Yeah. Well, you should talk to Mike Harlow at some point, because Mike Harlow is a guy who actually got a permanent lifetime ban on Twitter until he proved someone internal to Twitter was targeting LGBT conservatives for permanent bans. He proved it, and then he got his account reinstated. Wow. So you should look into that. So that does exist.
Problematic. Yeah.
It is problematic. All right, let's go on to our next question. This is from Cynthia. Thank you, Cynthia, for sending this in. Why does the Democrat, I actually want to know your thoughts on this too. Why does the Democratic Party offer up such a weak candidate to run against Trump? There's no real excitement around Biden, even on the Democratic side, and many concerns. This seems to fly in the face of truly wanting to win the election by either mobilizing the Democratic base or demobilizing Trump voters. What are your thoughts on Biden?
I don't know anyone out there who will say that Biden was the best possible candidate for the Democratic Party. Frankly, I don't even think Biden would say that.
You would either.
It's a flawed process. It is not a rational process. I don't really think this has much to do with the Democratic Party per se. There's a lot of randomness involved. And it is, the way we choose our candidates is crazy. It's crazy. So that if I could redo the system, I think the number one thing we could do is use ranked choice voting. Get rid of the caucus system, which is just crazy, and start thinking about just better ways to represent the party. Get rid of money in elections, because I think that totally distorts who gets chosen. So yeah, I'm not going to defend the process. I'm not going to, but he's our nominee at this point, and so he's the one I'm behind.
I mean, so what if one of the biggest concerns I have with Biden, honestly, is that I think he has dementia. If he doesn't have full dementia, something is definitely wrong. And I thought this back when I saw him speak at the New Hampshire State Democratic Convention. And I said to him, and this is again, when I was still a Democrat, I was supporting Pete Buttigieg. I was there with him. I had my Buttigieg shirt on and everything. And I'm sitting there watching Biden going, he's slurring his words. He's not making sense. There's definitely something wrong with him. He didn't even seem like he wanted to be there. And then the same thing happened when I saw him again 2 days before the Trump rally. And this was before right before the New Hampshire primary. So this was Biden's big closing argument in one of the most important primaries, some would argue. And he got up there and told a story about how he gave his hat to a kid on a sidewalk so the kid wouldn't be cold. There was nothing about policy or anything. It was the most bizarre thing in my life. And so I thought there was something wrong with him for a really long time. And I guess my question is, how can people rationalize voting for someone that is not all there?
Yeah. That's a really tough question. And what I will say is it's certainly possible that Biden has some form of dementia, straight up, given his age, and some of the errors that he's made in his speeches. But I guess there are two things that come to mind for me when I think about this. One is I don't think there's any less evidence for Trump having dementia. I think I've seen a lot of symptoms in him that are equivalent. So the second thing I'd say is probably our best solution, if we're really going to go down this road, is to mandate neuropsych testing for any presidential candidate. You know, having, rather than having each one go and, you know, have their personal doctor who, you know, who knows whether they can be trusted, or have the White House doctor, like who knows if they can be trusted, and you know, maybe have a panel of psychologists, psychiatrists, neurologists who do brain imaging, who do standardized testing, and make those results available to the public. Then we could get a real diagnosis about whether or not dementia is in fact happening and how severe it is. But otherwise, I think it's really hard, even for me as a psychiatrist who's like done these evaluations. I have diagnosed dementia, to sit back from the outside and say that, yeah, Biden has dementia and that dementia is worse than Trump's dementia, and therefore I should vote for Trump.
I have to push back on the fact that Trump has dementia. Trump is, you know, he's a blowhard. That's for sure. But I sat in a Trump rally and watched the man speak off the cuff for 2 hours without making any of the gaffes that Biden makes when he's out of his basement in 10 minutes. He has to have note cards and a teleprompter in his basement to even know what he's talking about. And so, you know, I think that there's a lot of criticism to be made of Trump, but he for weeks was on the news for hours a day and wasn't saying the stuff that Biden was. He's in these rallies speaking for hours off the cuff. As someone who speaks professionally, it is very difficult to do what he does. I just can't get behind the fact that I don't buy that Trump has dementia. There are a lot of things to hate about Trump. We can agree on that, but the dementia is not a thing.
But again, like there are a lot of people who are making the opposite argument. So how do we as a society negotiate that and make sure that both sides are seeing things accurately, when both sides are motivated by political interest to see their own candidate as healthy when the other side isn't? And it seems like what we need in those moments is an impartial arbiter, somebody like, you know, that who can, you know, there's nothing, if Trump doesn't have dementia, he has nothing to lose from being evaluated, just like Biden, if he doesn't have dementia, has nothing to lose from being evaluated.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but it's all about who's doing the evaluating and what biases do they have. Absolutely. And that would always be a concern for me. Either way, to be honest. But I think, you know, from my perspective, elections are supposed to take care of this, you know, and the primary should have been, you know, the voters saying Joe Biden is obviously not well, and therefore I'm not going to vote for him. But then it almost seemed like the Democratic Party swooped in before Super Tuesday and got Amy Klobuchar to drop out and got Pete Buttigieg to drop out because Bernie was going to sail to the nomination, and they kept Elizabeth Warren in to take votes away from Bernie so that Biden could be set up to be the nominee. And, you know, I mean, maybe I'm being conspiratorial with that. I don't think I am. I think the Democratic Party set it up this way because they were choosing between Biden and Bernie, and they said, well, I don't want Bernie. So I guess as a progressive, as someone who's a progressive, how do you feel about the way the Democratic Party inserts themselves, where Bernie had a very clear path to victory and said, nope, Bernie, not this year, just like we took it away from you in 2016. How do you feel about that?
You know, the thing I always find interesting about that particular view that the Democratic Party took it away is that if you looked at the polling data in like state by state throughout the first part of the primary, Bernie always had less support than all the other candidates combined. And so, and when you ask people, well, if you know, one of those other candidates dropped out of the race, who would you support? None of them were ever opting to go to Bernie. The breakdown was always to go to Biden or to go to Klobuchar or to go to Elizabeth Warren or to Buttigieg. People were not, so the division was always Bernie versus everybody else. It was not Bernie versus another candidate. And so the majority of the party, the majority of the voters were never in favor of Bernie, even though he was leading in the actual vote count for a long time. So I think what actually happened was that the process was just of consolidation was just accelerated. And the Democratic Party facilitated that happening, getting to the place where it became clear that he was really the minority, not the majority candidate. But I understand why that raised hackles. Like it isn't pretty. But a lot of times party politics isn't pretty. But ultimately, I do think we got to the exact same place that we were headed anyway. It just happened faster.
I mean, I don't know about the outcome, but I look at the Republican Party, and the Republican Party could have done exactly the same thing in 2016. And sure. I mean, maybe they regretted not doing it, but Trump didn't get the majority of the vote. Trump got his 33%, but because all the vote was split among everyone else, that ended up being enough to win. It was about having 1/3 of the vote. And, the Republican Party just let it play out. They said, this is how it works. This is how elections work. They didn't interfere. They didn't get people to drop out so that everyone threw their weight behind Ted Cruz to keep Trump from winning. They just let it play out. And it just seems like the Democrats always try to do something dirty. They did Bernie dirty in 2016. I think they did him dirty again. And I think I would have had much less issue with it if they had just let it play out. And maybe even Biden still wins. Fine, whatever. But they didn't. They gamed it. Like, how do you feel? I want to know how you feel about this, Karen.
Well, I think though, when you say did something dirty, I'm not sure I totally follow that, because from what I'm not going to speak for 2016, because it definitely seemed like there were some questionable thumb on the scales kind of thing going on there. But in 2020, I haven't seen any evidence that any rules were broken, or like all I saw was people putting, really asking people to step back for the good of the party. I mean, I think are there other things that happen that I don't know about?
I don't know. I mean, I think that not allowing the elections to play out and not allowing the voters a chance to have their say, to me, that seems fundamentally an antithesis to what the whole point is, that the people should get to cast their vote to decide. And it shouldn't be a matter of the party elites coming in and saying, you know what? You children, go run and play on the playground. We're going to make this decision for you by narrowing this down and taking away the candidates that you may have otherwise voted for. And so for me, it was just like, that left a really bad taste in my mouth, if I'm honest. And it wasn't the first time they'd done it. Like, I mean, even when they changed the debate rules, even after Tulsi Gabbard won her delegate and was good and should have, by all rights and purposes, have been allowed in that last debate, even though it wouldn't have made a difference, but it doesn't even matter. But the DNC was like, nope, changing the rules, keeping Tulsi away. Like, it's stuff like that. It's just they always play dirty to get to the outcome, to try to engineer the outcome, rather than just letting the rules be, establishing what they are, letting them play out, and then letting the voters decide.
Whenever I hear the word always, it makes me nervous, because there were lots and lots of things the Democratic Party could have done early on to make sure Biden was the nominee. That didn't happen. So maybe we can certainly argue about whether or not they went too far, but I can think of a lot worse they could have done that they didn't. So they're not always going to do whatever it takes, but they are a political party.
They are, such as they are. So I kind of want to just do a quick pause. And again, I don't think we're going to get through all these questions. And so I apologize for everyone who sent them in, but I feel like we're just having such a good discussion. But I kind of want to turn the tables, and I want to see, like, so, do you have any questions for me as someone like that left the party and is now like Trump? Well, I'm not really Trump. I'm more anti-Democrat, but I want to know, like, do you have any questions for me that you'd like my perspective on?
Oh, sure. Well, yeah. So I guess my first question would just be, like, if it wasn't for the flaws in the Democratic Party right now, as you see them, would you be voting for Trump?
It would really depend on who the nominee is from the Democrats. I would not vote for Biden. There's no way I would vote for Biden. And I said that from the beginning. And, especially since, we don't know who his VP is going to be yet, but if it's Amy Klobuchar, and I know she's being vetted, Amy Klobuchar was always a very hard no for me. Even when I was like, vote blue no matter who, it was always except for Amy Klobuchar because she's a workplace bully. I spend my life trying to fight workplace bullying, like not on board. And so, I think it would really depend who the nominee was. Certainly, there were people that they could have nominated that would have gotten my attention. Tulsi Gabbard. I would have voted for Tulsi Gabbard. I would have voted for Andrew Yang. Oh, God, I can't even believe I'm saying this out loud. I might have even voted for Marianne Williamson, just, for shits and giggles. So there were absolutely people that I would have considered voting for, but not Biden and not Amy Klobuchar and not probably several. I probably wouldn't have voted for Elizabeth Warren either. I think she got way too on the crazy train for me at the end.
What you said that you're not a big fan of Trump, and that it sounds like primarily you're moving toward him because of behavior you've seen on the left. So I guess if I'm trying to like figure out like where you are in your like on a feeling thermometer for Trump, if 10 is like as positive as you can be, like Trump is the best president we've ever had, and 0 is like the worst president we've ever had, where would you put yourself?
There are things that I like about Trump. I don't know. I'm gonna have to ponder the scale question. I don't know exactly how to answer that right this second, but I'll tell you what I like about Trump. I liked his handling of the economy. I don't think that we could blame what's going on in the economy right now on Trump. This has to do with China, and they did what they needed to do. But the economy before was very, very, very good, and I'm a person that I care about people having jobs. I care about people having opportunities, and so I really liked the low unemployment rate. And so I have to give Trump points for that. And people can argue all they want that it was the Obama economy. And I'm going to be honest, I think that, yes, I'll say it's the Obama economy for the beginning. But once we got to year 3 of the Trump presidency, that's Trump's economy at that point. At bare minimum, he could have crashed it way earlier if he had been screwing that up. And he didn't. So I have to give him points for that. I have to give him points for prison reform. I think that was very much needed. And I don't think, I can't take that away from him. I'm not happy with the wall. I think the wall is stupid. I'm not happy with how I think that there was an opportunity for him to actually do actual immigration reform and being married to an immigrant. That's actually important to me. I think the immigration system is completely messed up. And I think there are so many things that he could have done that were just could have been common sense things. So I think probably if you had asked me before all this with the pandemic, I probably would have been like, yeah, I'll give Trump like a 6 or a 7. I don't think he's the best president we've ever had. I don't think he's the worst president we've ever had. He's gotten some stuff done. He's done stuff that I like. And so I have to go there. But I'll be honest, I really started to become more impressed with his leadership as I saw him handling the pandemic. And I was one of those people watching every single daily briefing, watching Trump try to step up, trying to do the right thing, trying to bring people together, and then just being combated by the media the entire time. And I think that really watching him and listening to him speak in an extended period of time, where it wasn't just a clip on the news, it was listening to the whole conversation, I became much more impressed with the leadership that I saw. And frankly, did he do it perfectly? Absolutely not. He did not do it perfectly. But could anyone have done it perfectly in these circumstances? I don't think so. And so I think he did pretty good. And so I have to give him points for that as well. So I'm not totally anti-Trump. I do definitely care more about the Democrats not being in power than I am on the Trump train. But there are things that I like about him as well.
Great. Thanks for
Yeah, and if you happen to think of any more, we can definitely I'll definitely do my best. All right, let's see. I'm gonna go back. And actually, this is a good question for this is a nice little segue. This is from Pink Anime Fox, again from Locals, and they want to know, please discuss how arguing someone out of their anti-left vote would differ from arguments used against someone who truly supports the Trump administration policies. That's a good question. So obviously, like if you're trying to persuade someone, like
I'm not sure I got it.
So this person's basically saying like, if you're discussing and trying to persuade someone like me, I'm more of an anti-left vote, than trying to persuade someone who is a pro-Trump person, how might those arguments differ? So I'll just read it again. Okay. Please discuss how arguing someone out of their anti-left vote would differ from arguments based against someone who truly supports the Trump administration policies.
An anti-left vote. So okay. So for the most part, I'm just trying to understand people. That's what I do, and to get to the root of what's driving them. And then I try to create a safe space where we can kind of reflect on those beliefs together. And in coming at it from that perspective, it doesn't really matter if your position is more driven by dislike of the left or driven by affection for the right. Either way, what matters is having a place to really consider whether you're thinking about this situation is realistic and empathic, and whether it is logical. So all of those things are what I'm really trying to create in a conversation. The one thing I will say that probably rises in importance in a conversation with someone who is really anti-left is that I do consider myself a representative of the left, and so I kind of hope that my interaction, my portion of the interaction, will go some way toward getting rid of stereotypes and biases that might exist. Maybe break through the notion that all Berkeley liberals are out of their minds, which I got to say I get a lot. People often say to me, "I can't believe you're from Berkeley. I can't believe you're liberal. I can't believe that you're really far left because you make too much sense and you're not screaming epithets at me." So that is important to me.
So what are your thoughts about Antifa?
Oh, don't get me started.
Because honestly, that was one of the things when I started watching protests and seeing Antifa acting crazy, because I would basically watch like Tim Pool's footage where he just walked around these protests for like hours and hours and hours and just recorded what he saw. Yeah. Antifa's crazy. And that was one of the things I was like, no.
I think I'd mentioned this before, but I am a nonviolent activist. I don't believe in violence for any reason. And so Antifa's methods, when they resort to violence, I find them appalling and unacceptable. What I can tell you is that the majority of people in Berkeley agree with that. Antifa is like this tiny little fraction of people who come not primarily from Berkeley, but from all over the state, who have coordinated and organized to, for some reason, hold protests in our community as opposed to other places. For the most part, I agree with their, stated goals of being opposed to fascism. Like, yeah, I'm opposed to fascism too, but using violence or shutting down free speech in order to do that, not okay.
Do you think Trump is a fascist?
I think he supports some policies that have definite fascist overtones. Do I think he's equivalent to Hitler? No.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. So we have a super chat from Sam, and he's got a good question. Sam, thank you. As a doctor, has Karen used the Socratic method to determine if she likes or if she dislikes Trump because of emotion or logic?
Wow. So I love the Socratic method. I love asking questions as a way of discovering truth. That's that in many ways, that's kind of at the root of the work I do. Usually, of course, I'm the person asking the questions and the other person is the one answering. But I love to engage in dialogues where the other person is asking me questions and forcing me to examine my beliefs, because I really come from a place of believing that, I don't have all the answers. I'm a human being like everybody else. I am susceptible to bias and distortion in my thinking, just like everybody else. And my best hope for kind of overcoming that is reflecting on it. In terms of whether my feelings and thoughts about Trump are primarily emotion or reason driven, I have to assume that emotion is like a huge part of it. If I didn't, I would be denying my own humanness. And the way that political psychologists like me think about the brain and political reasoning is that emotion always comes first, that we form our opinions on the basis of intuition and gut reactions, and then we think about our feelings using our reason, and we develop rationalizations for why we have those gut responses and intuitions. If we're really good and really systematic in our thinking and dedicated to overcoming our biases as much as possible, we can kind of bootstrap our way to checking our intuitions and kind of getting over those with reasoning and Socratic questioning and things like that. And that's what I've tried to do. But I am not going to sit here and tell you that my reasoning about things is without error, because I'm sure there's plenty of it.
I have a huge smile on my face, honestly, because one of the things that I really am trying to get people on the right to understand is the role that emotions play in their decision makings. Because they say this all the time, like, Carlin, the right makes decisions with facts, the left makes decisions with feelings. And a mantra that I've taught this for years. I actually do a presentation about the psychology of office politics. And the number one thing I always want people to take away from that is that people make decisions emotionally and then they justify them rationally.
Yep.
And it's just the way it is. That's just the way our brain works, right?
Right. I have the exact same conversation with my friends on the left all the time, because they're always telling me, but the people on the right are just irrational and they don't have good reasons for what they believe and they just ignore facts. And I'm like, you know what? We do the exact same thing on the left. So this isn't a right or left thing. This is a human thing, and we need to work together to figure out the best way to come to better decisions.
Yeah. No, and I mean, people on the right, one of the things that I found, and I actually would like to hear your response to this, is so one of the things that I found that was really surprising to me is in conversations I had with people on the right, they were much more able to back up why they thought the way they did with facts and with data, and they had reasons and they thought about it. Whereas if I was having the same conversations with people on the left, it was like, Carlin, we're just doing it because Trump's stupid, or like, you're a racist. And that was what I was getting from everyone. And I kept trying to say, like, no, you have to have an actual argument. Like, use your words, use your brain. You are a smart person. So what's your experience been?
I don't know that I've noticed much of a left-right difference in it, but what I notice is people who have very little interaction with those who think differently from them, whether that be on the left or the right, do get kind of lazy in their cognitions. So they're kind of accustomed to speaking in shorthand and not having like not needing to justify their beliefs or explain them to other people because everyone is already thinking exactly like them. People, on the other hand, who live in communities where they regularly come into contact with others who hold different beliefs are more likely to be accustomed to having to explain themselves.
No, that's fair enough. So we have one more question from Xander from Locals, and I think that Xander's question is good because I mean we're talking about having conversations and we're trying to have a rational conversation about policy. I think on some level, and what has he done that you like, and what has he done that you don't like. But Xander's question is, what if the desire to disrupt the status quo in DC politics is just more compelling than party loyalty and a vote for Trump versus Biden that brings about?
Yeah, I definitely think that there is a significant strain of American politics right now that is very anti-establishment, and I do think that played a role in Trump getting elected. I've been particularly interested in this one strain of research that came out in Political Science last year that looked at what are called chaos voters, and they tend to be voters who are mostly just fed up with the system in one way or another. And before I heard about these chaos voters, I kind of thought of them as my informal shorthand for it was like FU voters, like people who were just like fed up, pissed off, and flipping everybody off with their votes at this point. And so I think that there is a strong strain of that's woven through the American public right now. People are tired. They're really tired of the way politics have been for a long time. They're tired of feeling left out and unheard. They're tired of promises that have gone unfulfilled. They're tired of feeling like no one actually cares about them. So that over time leads to a lot of pent up rage, understandably, and people are looking for ways to express it. One way to express pent up rage is to riot, and another way is to cast votes that kind of blow up the system in some way.
Well, I mean, we're seeing riots in Minneapolis right now, but what someone like, again, I'm going to reference Tim Pool just because he talked about this on his channel earlier today, is that people who are rioting, they may not even be in those communities. They're coming in to loot and be opportunist about it. Do you think that that's a component of it?
I have to confess, I haven't really been following the coverage, so I don't know who is
fair enough.
involved.
Fair enough. You should watch him. He's a disaffected lefty. You would like him. So I guess I just have like a couple more questions. So is there anything that Donald Trump has done that you're like, that was a good thing?
Oh, sure. I mean, you listed one of the things. Like I thought the criminal justice reform was fabulous. I wish that that had been done a lot sooner. And one thing that I would point to where I initially was skeptical, but I think he probably made the right call, was it was stopping travel from China. It was interesting when that decision was made, because I had just been following the World Health Organization's recommendation on that, and the advice coming from a lot of public health officials who were saying, well, research shows that stopping travel doesn't usually work. And he decided to go against the recommendations of the World Health Organization, and that that's a pretty bold thing to do. And ultimately, I think the evidence shows that while it didn't stop the spread of the virus, it probably slowed it down a little bit. So,
Okay, fair enough. Is there anything that Trump could do to win your vote?
Honestly, probably not. It's at this point, I feel like I know him pretty well. Like, it would take a lot for me to get to a place where I'd be like, he's not who I think he is. Now, is it conceivable that there would be a situation where Trump would get my vote? Yeah, if there was a nominee from the Democratic Party, like let's say Biden was replaced by someone who, I was extremely concerned about, or let's, suppose that I became more concerned about Biden's mental health than I currently am. Maybe, but I think it's highly unlikely.
Okay, fair enough. Are there any final messages that you would like to tell people? I mean, maybe on both sides of the aisle about having, like, I feel like we've had a civil dialogue. Has this been a good dialogue for you?
Absolutely.
I feel like we've behaved ourselves. No one's been called a name, which is always like, we have a very low bar for success on my channel. Like no name calling. But is there anything that you want to articulate to people about how to speak to people who might disagree with you and what they should know?
Gosh, when I get asked this question, I always feel like, going back to like kindergarten, it's like, it's like you say, don't call people names, treat them the way you would like to be treated. Remember that the person you're talking with is a person too. It's all very, once I start articulating at the most basic level, it sounds like I'm talking to a 5-year-old.
I know, right? I keep telling people all the time, I'm like, we're literally going back to kindergarten. Like, what are we teaching the children? Do what you are teaching the children. Just stop. That's all you need to do.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Karen, I really appreciate you taking the time out. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I mean, we obviously don't agree on things, but that's okay. We don't have to agree on everything.
Like I said, it would be really weird if we agreed on everything.
Absolutely. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
Gosh, well, you can find me on Twitter. That's a really easy way to find me. You can find me on Medium. I try to publish on a regular basis. You can follow me on Facebook. One of the great things about following me on Facebook is you can actually dive into conversations that I have there on a regular basis. Most of the people who follow me are progressives, but there are also quite a few conservatives there too. And I really try to get people to have conversations on my feed where they engage in a productive way.
Cool. And we are getting lots of good feedback in the chat saying, well done, ladies. It was a good conversation. People really liked it. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. If you liked our conversation, please make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, I guess that's all for today. And I will see you guys again soon. Thank you again, Karen.
Thank you. It was excellent.